A woman's work, whether at home or on the job, is as important as a man's.
No matter where we go, history surrounds us. So many characters playing parts in so many stories. In this Travelparkourist episode, we look at a particularly wonderful story, women's role in aviation. And we brought some help. Hi.
Hey.
Our friend Hope here is going to join us as we learn more about women in flight.
Gender roles in history have, in part, been determined by cultural norms, economic realities, and varied preconceptions. The role of women in history is complex, and we are not going to try and make sense of it all. Today, we are just looking at flight.
In our Science of Flight series, we looked at the science behind how we fly, and the historical figures who drove aviation to new heights.
But it's not really the full story.
In order to get the full story, we reached out to the Women's International Air and Space Museum in Cleveland, Ohio. The museum's mission is to showcase the history and culture of women in aviation, bringing history to life.
Hello. How are you guys doing? Welcome to the Women's Air and Space Museum in Cleveland, Ohio.
Heather Alexander is with the museum. We wanted to ask her a few questions about the role female aviators have played throughout history. She was kind enough to help us tell our Travelparkourist story.
It's nice to meet you.
This is great. Thank you for contacting us.
So we just had a few questions we would like to ask you.
Sure.
Where does women's role in aviation begin?
Well, the role of women in aviation really starts at the beginning. So Katherine Wright, the sister of the Wright brothers, was involved with their development of the aircraft. And she did a lot of behind-the-scenes part. So she did a lot with the paperwork and the contracts and meeting with the dignitaries and really promoting her brother's invention, known as the first powered aircraft.
Can you tell us about some of the milestones in the history of women's aviation?
Sure. Women have been setting records from the beginning up till the present day. So you know that Amelia Earhart did set a record as the first solo female across the Atlantic in 1932. And they were doing altitude, long distance. When they got into aerobatics, they were interested in doing the aerobatics. So they really did want to keep up with what the men were doing. And just, you know, part of it was to prove themselves, but part of it was just because they really enjoyed flying.
So what was happening in other parts of the world? Were women flying everywhere?
They were. So, you know, a lot is focused on America because the birth of aviation was here. So there was a lot more going on. But there was aviation records and milestones being set across the world. Amy Johnson was an English pilot, and she was the first woman to fly solo from London to Australia. Hanna Reich was a German pilot, and she actually set over 40 records in gliders and non-powered aircraft. And another little-known woman was Sabiha Gökçe, and she was a Turkish woman who was actually adopted. She was an orphan adopted by the Ataturk, and he gave her the schooling and the training, and she became the first female fighter pilot in the world.
The 1920s, 30s, and 40s saw major advances in aviation. Pilots and planes could go higher, further, faster.
Women began to play an important role in aviation. A whole host of record-breaking flights took place in this era, including Amelia Earhart's solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean in 1932.
Air races and air shows were a big deal. Pilots like Pancho Barnes raced not only in air shows, but in movies, showing the whole world what airplanes could do.
Florence Lowe Barnes, best known to the flying fraternity as Pancho, one of the greatest flyers that ever wore pants.
The newsreels of the day were full of stories about these women. Aviators like Kate Stinson, Louise Staden, Florence Kingland-Smith, Bobby Trout, Ruth Nichols, and Amelia Earhart all became household names. Women's groundbreaking achievements in flight are truly amazing when you think about how they were perceived during this time. What was life like for women in the 1920s and 30s?
At that point, women were expected to stay home. It was commonplace for them to stay home, take care of the households, take care of their families. So for them to go out and do things such as flying airplanes or even racing cars or speedboats, which some of the ladies were doing, they got a lot of controversy about that. Some people thought that the women shouldn't be doing that. One, it wasn't a safe endeavor for them, or two, that they thought that it just wasn't their place. They shouldn't be doing that kind of thing. But a lot of people did support that and to really, push the boundaries. And those women had so much determination and were willing to take the risk and prove that women could do it just as well as the men.
Some women faced even more complex obstacles, the color of their skin. Can you tell us about Bessie Coleman?
Bessie Coleman is a great character from history. So she was one of 13 children born in Texas. She wanted to become a pilot, but because she was a woman and because she was African American, no one here would teach her how to fly. So she actually learned French, went over to France and got her license over there.
Change can move at a glacial pace, yet when conditions warrant, people adapt with amazing speed. During World War II, we saw a massive shift in the role women played in aviation. It began in England with the start of the war in 1939.
Women helped the war effort in many ways, building airplanes and making ammunition, code breaking, working as air traffic controllers. By 1943, there were over 17 million women working to support the British war effort.
In December of 1941, the United States officially joined the war, and American women did their part. On the factory floor, building planes. In the air, training pilots. In the office, designing aircraft. Women stepped up and made major contributions. The U.S. war effort was powered by women workers.
Many more men and women are needed for jobs like these. You can do your part. Get in the fight.
One of the most famous group of women aviators during the war were the WASPs, the Women Airforce Service Pilots. WASPs were tasked with training new pilots, flying planes from the factory to the military airfields, freeing up their male counterparts to fly combat missions in Europe and the Pacific. After the war, there was no turning back. With the door cracked open, brave women seized the moment and broke down barriers.
The question was, with the war over, now what?
When World War II ended, what happened to all the women involved in aviation?
So there were 1,102 women in the Women Airforce Service Pilots. They were the women that flew during World War II. And they were the test pilots. They were delivering the planes from the factories to the air bases. They were actually training the male cadets how to fly. Some of them were able to continue flying because of the communities that they were in or their family support. Each one was a little bit different, but every single one of those ladies was an absolute spitfire. They all had the determination to support their country, do what they could for it.
In every town and hamlet across the nation, the story was the same. The Japanese surrender brought jubilation unrestrained.
The societal changes that came about during the war had a lasting effect on our culture. After the war, women continued to impact aviation, but things really picked up in the 1970s and 80s.
Ignition and liftoff of STS-7 and America's first woman astronaut, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
As the world entered a new age, women were there to push aviation forward. They literally went out of this world, into space.
In part 2 of our Women in Flight series, we look at the impact women have on aviation today and what the future holds.
If you like what you see, tell a friend.
If you subscribe and follow us on Instagram, we'll let you know when our next story is published.
Take care, and remember, the future belongs to all of us.